Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazicich, and we're continuing on here in our study here in Chapter 11. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and please open them up, and we're in Chapter 11, and we'll be covering verses 16 to 24. Okay, then coming along here, we'll once again look to Dr. Ross Wagner here to set the table for our discussion today. Paul's veiled references here to Israel's eschatological redemption presage the climax of his entire argument in Romans 11:25 to 36. Yet it is crucial to recognize that this promise of future fullness and acceptance is not a deus ex machina hurriedly thrust on stage just at the point where the implications of Paul's logic finally become too terrible for him to bear. As I've argued throughout this study, Israel's ultimate reconciliation to God is a conviction that undergirds Paul's theodicy in Romans 9 to 11 from the very beginning. The concept of remnant introduced first in Romans 9:27 does not function to exclude the rest of Israel from the scope of God's redemptive activity, as if remnant and Israel were coterminous entities in Paul's conceptual universe. Very good point. Rather, the existence of a remnant at the present time, 11:5, vouchsafes for Paul the fuller redemption of all Israel in the future. Paul explicates this connection between the remnant and the ultimate salvation of all Israel by means of two metaphors. The first draws on the commandment to offer to God the first portion of dough, Numbers 15:18 to 21. Aparche phuramatos. If the first portion of dough is holy, then so is the entire lump. E de he haparche hagia kaita phurama. And if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also. And this is Romans 11:16a. By giving to the Lord the first portion, one acknowledges that all of one's sustenance belongs to God and represents God's gracious gift. In the same way, the remnant in the present time, chosen by grace from Israel, is a sign and seal that all Israel is the Lord's, the earnest of the full harvest of redemption yet to come. Those were some excellent remarks there by Wagner, and feel free to stop this and reread this again if you need to. Okay, then coming then to this slide, we will offer up a translation as we traditionally do, and beginning here in verse 16. Now, if the first fruits is holy, the lump, and we could say, or the lump of dough is also, and if the root is holy, the branches are also. Now, if certain of the branches were broken off, and you, although being a wild olive, were grafted in amongst them, and you became a fellow partaker of the oil-laden root of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. But if you boast, you do not bear the root, but the root you. Therefore shall you say, the branches were broken off in order that I might be grafted in. Well enough. By unbelief they were broken off, but you stand by faith. Do not think highly, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither shall he spare you. Therefore, behold the kindness and the severity of God. Severity upon those who fell, but upon you the kindness of God, if you continue on in kindness, since you also shall be cut off. But those, if they do not abide in unbelief, they shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. For if you, by nature, were cut off from a wild olive, and contrary to nature were grafted into the good olive, how much more these who are by nature shall be grafted into their own olive tree. So he ends here with another Calva-Omer argument. But anyhow, so this is our translation, and then we will look to structure in our next slide. Okay, then by way of review here, just to note that we're here on point 3 within the dispositio of Paul's presentation here. And this is going to be the third portion that basically covers 11:1 to 32. And we already, over the past couple of weeks, we went over point A, which was 1 to 11, that God has not wholly rejected his people. And we looked at this. This was God's gracious election of a remnant. And we saw this was in verses 1 to 10. And then last week we began to look a little further here into point B here, and we covered the first part of this. Today we'll be covering the second part here. So all of our last time we were looking here at verses 11 to 15, which basically covered Israel's misstep and acceptance, which grants missional salvation and eschatological life to all. And we found this here in verses 11 to 15, and it began with Paul's his rhetorical question and answer. And then he also gave his these Calva-Omer arguments here that he began to put forward here, and concerning Israel's fullness. And then he ended, in verse 15 with the final basis statement. That was a basis for Paul's own restatement, to the Gentiles concerning his ministry that we saw in 13 to 14. But it's also a final basis statement that would cover here all the way back to 11, from 11 to verse 12, and that went over his first Calva-Omer argument, or this a minore ad meius argument, which is an argument from a minor premise to to a greater a major premise. And anyhow, so within this, we're coming down here to the allegory here, because within point B, Israel's misstep and acceptance grants salvation and eschatological life to all with allegory. So we weren't able to do the allegory part, and that's what we're doing tonight. So we have Paul's allegorical illustration of the olive tree, and the Gentiles' relationship to Israel. So that's basically kind of what we're looking at here today, verses 16 to 24. And then his last topic that he's going to then cover, his third one here, we would have A, B, and C. We'll get to that on our next time, and that's 25 to 32. Okay, then this particular slide is pretty intense actually here, but it accurately represents the text that we're looking at here from verses 16 to 24. And upon a little more reflection here, what I have entitled this section is Paul's allegory of the olive tree and diatribal Parenesis to the Gentiles concerning the holiness of Israel. Now, I wanted to say it that way because actually, you remember, how we ended off down here in verse 24 was the focus back on Israel. That he told the Gentiles to fear, at least, God removed them and cut them off if they don't continue in faith and in abide in some type of cooperation with God. Obviously, their salvation is absolutely 100% conditional. That Paul states here, and we will see this. And if you don't think your salvation's conditional based upon your faith in Christ, well, then I don't know what text you've been reading, but you certainly haven't been reading this one. And so there is a human responsibility here, and that is to abide in faith and in kindness. And Paul here threatens the Roman Church that they could be broken off, just like God had broken off Israel. And there's a condition for that. But the way it ends is that is said that if Israel doesn't have to continue in their unbelief, but if they turn and believe in Christ as their Messiah, well, then God's able then to regraft them in again. And then he ends this here with a final Calva Omer argument, and it's focused on Israel's regrafting into the branches onto the stem of the olive. Which this is really what it's going over, is that Israel hasn't fall so that they would never ever get up again. Paul says, "Me genoita, may it never be." Okay, so Israel didn't stumble so as to fall permanently. Okay, and then this verse 16 is very important for the whole interpretation of the unit, and Paul's proverbial type statement that he makes in verse 16, as Cranfield and others have said, definitely underscores the why this section is entitled the Allegory of the Olive Tree and Paul's diatribal Parenesis to the Gentiles concerning the holiness of Israel. So God not only has in the present time a remnant, but God has not rejected unbelieving Israel completely. Now they are taken out of salvation if they don't believe, but belief is still an option for them as long as they're living in this life, and God has said that He's able to regraft them in again. Why? Because by nature they are part of the cultivated olive tree, whereas the Gentiles were just basically second string, wild olives, grafted into the rich root of the olive. So that's very important to observe. So there are 3 points here. We have the initial, proverb-like statement in verse 16, which is an arboricultural metaphor for the conveyance of Israel's holiness from part to the whole. And this then kind of fills in this, the Bildungsmotif that we were talking about last time, that, hey, there's still something about Israel, and, Paul was putting it together, their fullness and their acceptance. Well, now he's developing this further, and it's going into this whole metaphor, or this allegory here on the olive tree. And it all begins here in verse 16 with some of these mixed metaphors that Paul gives from an arboricultural point of view. And that occurs in verse 16, but that is the key to interpret all that follows. And then the allegory itself extends from 17 to 21. The allegory of Israel as the cultivated olive tree, and the Gentiles engrafted, basically as wild cultivars. So this takes up 17 to 21. And then the third point down here is Paul's conclusion concerning God's character and commitment to both Israel and the Gentiles. And that takes up 22 to 24, and we've got some very detailed sections here, and we will get into that as we move through verse by verse. Okay, so in this slide here, we're going to look at the remarks that Jude had made that were very incisive. Since the motif of the root in 11:16c is picked up in 11:17c and 18b, it is inappropriate to separate the analogies in 11:16 from 17 to 24, as in many commentaries. Very, very important observation. In fact, 16 provides the premise for the enthymeme, whose application extends from 17 to 24. Exactly. With this arrangement that traces the logical and rhetorical development of the argument from 16 through the end of the pericope in verse 24. And then he goes into some other, it's possible to see the correspondence of the references to branches being broken off in 11:17a and 11:19a, between the imperatives in lines 11:18a and 11:20c, I just wanted to bring this to your attention. To follow this along, you would need to stop this and look at each of these examples to exactly follow along with what he's saying. The elegant development in the fourth sentence is also noteworthy, with Chrestotes, kindness, and apotamia, severity, taken up in inverted sequence in 11:22b and 11:22c, and then reversed again as in 11:22e speaks of severity to Gentiles, and 11:23a describes kindness shown to the Jews. Weiss notes that the final lines in 11:23a and 11:24c are longer and hence more impressive than the others, which signals, in my view, an emphasis on the theme of Israel's ultimate inclusion. Exactly, that's the point. Paul's been building up this Bildungsmotif, that there's God isn't finished with Israel. And Paul's been building this up, with these Calva Omer arguments, there's, how much more Israel's fullness, and, and when Israel, when they become accepted, then it's going to produce life from the dead. And so this is much the same here. Exactly, Paul's going to underscore this, because he ends with a Calva Omer argument in verse 24. It's also noteworthy that the diatribal elements mark this entire pericope, with rhetorical questions in 11:11, verse 12, 15, and 24, and addresses to the imaginary interlocutor in the role of a wild olive shoot, so that the bearing of the argument on the Gentile mission and its beneficiaries becomes unmistakable. Just some very good comments from Jewett, and you would do well if you picked up his commentary. Okay, then coming then here to this particular slide, this may be the most important verse here out of the entire unit here from 16 to 24, because it basically, if you don't understand this is the key interpretive text here, as Jewett was saying, and what I did down here at the bottom here, now if the first fruit is holy, the lump of dough is also. And if the root is holy, the branches are also. So this is basically written in proverbial style, and we could look at this as Paul's first distich here, and then this would be his second distich. This would be line A, this would be line B, and again A and B. So he has this this quatrain here of versets that stylizes and sets up a whole theological argument here, and to really understand that, you would we'll look here at some slides here that would explain a little bit of Hebrew poetry, but just for the moment here, just hang with me on this. But I believe this is what Paul's doing here, and then to look at the text here diagrammatically, the text here, begins here with the Parenesis, the if clause, and then we have the then clause in the be, and so we have basically two conditional sentences here, the Parenesis along with the apodosis in both, but it's an argument of by inference here, and Jewett rightfully calls this an enthumeme, and we will let's go ahead and look at this de here, beginning here at the beginning of the of our sentence. It's functioning here just to we're translating it as now, just to connect sections together, and so I think this would be the most appropriate way here then to translate de here now, and then then we're going to look down to the Parenesis. Now, if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also. So then this use of kai here is adjunctive, and this use of kai here is conjunctive. It's just combining these clauses together here. But these two here uses of kai are both adjunctive, and we translate them as also. Okay, the lump is also. So we have here. Here we have this this predicate adjective here. If the first fruits is holy, and then the apodosis, the lump is also, and then again, if the root is holy, the branches are also. And so a lot of scholars have noticed here that the first the first distich here about the first fruits is going to be taken. You can either look to the LXX, the Septuagint use found in Numbers 15, or down here in the Hebrew text, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Daber el b'nei Yisrael ve'amart ta alehem bivo achem el haaretz asher ani mevi echem shama. So this just basically says, and Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the sons of Israel, and you shall say to them, when you go to the land that I am bringing you there, and it will come to pass when you eat from some of the bread of the land, you shall raise up a contribution to Yahweh. The first fruits of your dough, we'll just say a loaf of bread or a cake, you shall raise up a contribution as the contribution from or the contribution of the threshing floor, and thus you shall you shall raise it up. From the beginning of your dough, you shall give to Yahweh a contribution, basically throughout your generations. And to take note down here to Leviticus 23, and bread and we can say here roasted grain and heads of grain you shall not eat until the self-same day, until you bring the korban of your God, the statute, an eternal statute throughout your generations, in all of your dwelling places. So this is talking about the feast here of in the month of Aviv, the Passover, the barley harvest, and that they weren't to eat any of the bread until they first brought the first fruits of their dough as a loaf of bread here, and it was to be offered first to Yahweh, and then only after they brought their offering, then were they able then to partake of the harvest itself. So this is the element that Paul's referring to here, both in Numbers 15, 17, and you could, and also by way of Leviticus 23. And you can see some of the same wording here that you would find here in our text here, with aparke furamatos humin, the first fruits of your dough, as we would find here in verse 21 here, and this would be found in Numbers 15, 18. So you can look at these texts here, but this this verse 16 is very, very important to be able to understand. Now, if the first fruit is holy, the lump of dough is also, and if the root is holy, the branches are also, and it's to be inferred as holy. And then that leads naturally then into the whole Paul's allegory, and it's a two-step process, but he wanted to start off with the principle of first fruits, and Paul, very wisely he combines using the ideas taken from Hebrew poetry in this quatrain of two distichs. And the first one gives you an idea, but then the second one gives you a fuller idea, and with the root and the branches, then that plainly then connects us, as Jewett was saying, and it leads us on into the Paul's allegory of the olive tree, of the branches being broken off and then being grafted into the rich oil-laden root of the olive tree, where the Gentiles are grafted in. So this is very, very foundational, and it's interpretive, and that's why I said this is this determines the holiness of Israel. So Israel still has a future. Now we're talking about, God has not forsaken his people. I mean, even the people that, at the moment he is sentencing to hell, he hasn't written off the people. He's allowing them to live. Because there is going to come this generation, a future generation of these children that, when the times of the Gentiles are over with, then, or when the full number of Gentiles have come in, then all Israel will be saved. And we can see, the writing on the wall from the book of Revelation that, the times of the Gentiles comes to an end when he destroys the kingdoms of this earth, and then, that means the times of the Gentiles, right? Okay, just read Luke 21, and then compare it to the Matthew's Olivet Discourse and Mark's. You'll see the connection there. And with Luke's statement that, the times of the Gentiles. Very, very important, and we will continue on. Okay, we will continue on here with some remarks by Jewett. The enthymeme of verses 16 to 24 opens with a principle drawn from Numbers 15:20 to 21, that a portion of each lump of bread prepared for baking must be dedicated to God as a holy offering, thus rendering the entire batch of bread holy. The procedure of handling such an aparche offering is as follows. Of the first of your course meal you shall present a cake as an offering. Excuse me. As an offering from the threshing floor, so shall you present it. Of the first of your course meal you shall give to the Lord an offering throughout your generations. This small portion of the batch of bread becomes a burnt offering whose smoke is pleasing to Yahweh, who thereupon blesses the whole batch of dough, as well as the participants in the sacrifice. The same principle pertains with first fruits of the harvest. A holy relationship between supplicants and God is renewed through the offering that removes sins that distort that relationship. This brief introduction concerning yeast bread sets the framework for interpreting the following allegory, exactly, of the olive tree that begins in 16b and runs to the end of the pericope in verse 24. As K.H. Rensdorf explains, in such cases the religious quality of the sample guarantees the quality of the whole. Paul introduces this premise as if it would be readily accepted by his audience. The second half of Paul's premise statement develops the idea of the root and the branch, which seems more directly related to the subsequent argument concerning grafting into the wild olive tree. The precise rhetorical parallelism between 16a and 16b conveys the idea that the principle in one case extends to the other. Now, if the first fruit is holy, so also is the lump, and if the root is holy, so also are the branches. The principle of extended holiness provides the premise for Paul's enthymeme, which means that the basis for acknowledging the continued priority of Israel is that it provided the vehicle by which the holy, righteous community of the church came into the world. So this is very, very true, and this, this proverbial like statement that Paul makes here in verse 16 is the interpretive key to the whole unit, as Jewett and Cranfield have noted. And then coming then here to the characteristics of Old Testament poetry, as for Paul's, versets, this quatrain of versets, we should understand it underneath this rubric here. The fundamental formal feature of canonical poetry is the correspondence of thought in successive half-lines, known as parallelism of members, parallelismus membrorum. The thought may be repeated, contrasted, or advanced. It may be figurative, stair-like, or inverted. Parallelism may be both within lines and between lines. So Norman Gottwald just nails this relationship here. And this is exactly how you ought to read verse 16. And to piggyback a little bit upon what Norman Gottwald said, we can look here at some statements here, by and large, taken here from Robert Alter. The device known as semantic parallelism sets up a colometric system of correspondences where unity and diversity, homogeneity and heterogeneity, thesis and antithesis, parity and disparity, congruence and incongruence are locked up into a dialogical correspondence and conversation of meaning. Herder says that the two parallel members strengthen, heighten, and empower each other. Alter also says that what this and all conceptions of biblical parallelism as synonymity assume is a considerable degree of stasis within the poetic line. This stasis anchors the correspondence between the two lines. The purpose of the second verset is to have both elements that conjoin and disjoin, so that the correspondence of the two parallel members strengthen, heighten, and empower each other by means of both unity and diversity. The perception of diversity in a context of unity is important in parallelism. The purpose of parallelism, like the general purpose of imagery, is to superimpose the visual perception of an object onto the sphere of another so that a new picture emerges, a new form, a new gestalt, which is greater than the sum of its parts. The interpretive nature of parallelism, then, is patently heuristic. The interpretation is left up to the audience to read between the poetic lines in order to fill in the canvas to discern its gestalt, its form, its meaning. This meaning of discovery is entirely intentional by the author on the very basis of poetry's literary nature. that is so true. So Paul left that verse 16 is somewhat cryptic because it's heuristic. You got to be able to read between the poetic lines. You need to fill in the canvas. You need to discern its gestalt, its form, its meaning. Okay, and all of this, the need for stasis and the need for elements that that have both unity and diversity. So this is all taken up here, and Paul combines this within verse verse 16. It's within this quatrain. It's awesome. Okay, then coming here then to this slide. We will look diagrammatically here at this slide, and at the top here we will read the sentence here, and then we will work out its diagrammatical analysis below. Now, if certain of the branches were broken off, and you, although being a wild olive, were grafted in amongst them, and you became a fellow partaker of the oil-laden root of the olive, do not boast against the branches, but if you boast, you do not bear the root, but the root you. Okay, so then, and then when we then write this, diagrammatically here, we are going to. This is going to form a compound sentence. So we have the lion's portion up here in verses 17 all the way to 18a, and the base, our baseline here, our main clause is found here in 18a. Do not boast against the branches. So this right here becomes the main clause, and then we have our protasis, the protasis clauses here that are subordinate to the main clause, and that's how the sentence begins. Now, if certain of the branches were broken off, and you, although being a wild olive, were grafted in amongst them, and you became a partaker of the oil-laden root of the olive, but if you boast, you do not bear the root, but it's a very heavy contrast here. But the root, and then bears you, and so this here is how we are to understand it. But let's go back here and look at the structure. Okay, then coming then to this slide, we are trying to then remember, analyze the text, which I incorporated here in verses 17 to 18, and then that all of this here then is going to be taken up here underneath point alpha here, and we're going to have three main points here for this particular unit. But the whole unit is divided in half, and so then the beta part is going to be down here in verses 19 to 21. And so the whole is Paul's allegory of Israel as the cultivated olive tree and the Gentiles as engrafted wild cultivars. And so right now we're on the horticultural metaphors of the root and branches allegorically applied to the Gentiles. And to Israel and the Gentiles. That's verses 17 and 18. So we have the condition here of the broken branches of the cultivated olive, which is unbelieving Israel, and then we have the conditions of the wild olive branch of the believing Gentiles who were grafted in. And they were not only grafted into the olive, they became a partaker. And then the main clause of Paul's statement here of this conditional sentence then is a Parenesis to the Gentiles. And it has point A, which is a prohibition not to boast against the branches. That is to boast over the fallen branches of unbelieving Israel. And then there's point beta here, and it is a warning concerning superiority. And it was a reminder, remember, you don't bear the root, but the root bears you. And so it's very important that, as a prohibition, do not boast against the branches, because you got to remember, the whole purpose of the Gentiles is that they were to provoke Israel to jealousy. Now, they cannot be, provoking Israel to jealousy if their attitude is one of superiority. So that is why Paul, is telling the Gentiles that they should be, he gives them this prohibition to, not boast over the fallen branches of unbelieving Israel, because that's not how you're gonna, reach, these unbelieving Jews. You're gonna get a little more, mileage if you use honey, okay, so this here, as a means by which to attract. Okay, and so this is just our structure here, just so that you can understand how this sentence flows, and then how it's then itemized and then hierarchically structured to show you how the sentence is held together by the conditional part, and then the main clause, which functions as there's actually two Parenesis statements that Paul makes, but the first one completes the conditions, and which is just do not boast against the branches, which occurs here in 18a. And then we have another the second part is but if you boast, he says you don't bear the root, but the root bears you. So he basically, it's a 1-2 punch here with Paul's Parenesis to the Gentiles in with two rejoinders. Okay, then one thing we want to add here, coming back to looking at this particular verse here, when we look here at the part of this condition here for the Gentiles, and you, although being a wild olive, okay, were grafted in amongst them, and you became a fellow partaker of the oil-laden root of the olive. But if you boast, you do not bear the root, but the root you. So this is definitely, we need to understand that the Christianity is a Jewish religion. Okay, remember, Christianity just means follower of the Anointed One. I mean, it's that's why they call Messianic Jews, because the word Messiah comes from Mashiach. Now, when you translate Mashiach, the Hebrew word for Anointed One, into Greek, you get Christos, where we get Christ, and where we get Christian from. So remember, we are just the Messianic followers of Christian. Just means the Messianic followers of the Jewish Messiah. And so this text here, more than any other that you can think of in the New Testament, shows that Christianity is a sect of Judaism. And Paul basically lets us know that it's not, but I mean, you're basically understood as you're coming in on the coattails of the Jews. You're almost like a second-class citizen here. Now, I'm saying that facetiously, but I just wanted to emphasize that part here. We're being engrafted into, so we are becoming fellow participants with the Jews. So the blessing of Abraham's coming down to the world. But just remember that our religion is Jewish, and literally our Jewish roots. I mean, this is really big. But some people just think Christianity and Judaism are two different religions. Well, not really, according to Paul. The religion of Judaism are the broken branches. Okay, the branches that were broken off. So they were basically the ones that that God rejected, because they're not looking to Christ as their source of righteousness. But we just need to make sure that we kind of, it would be remiss if I didn't emphasize that here. So just remember that as Gentiles, we are grafted in to the stock of Israel, and as such, that then that has implications that we should be thankful and grateful for, being able to be being engrafted into the oil-laden rich root, of the olive tree. Okay, then moving right along here in our discussion here, and we'll be looking here at verses 18 here to 20. That's where to 20b, and we are probably just going to we're just going to include from here up. We'll get this part in our next slide down here. But we're continuing on here in this beta part here of our next point here in verses 19 to 21, and this is where Paul anticipates the interlocutors, his response here, and it picks up here in verse 21 here with a res un. Therefore shall you say, and then it goes in here then to some supposed speech that he puts in the mouth of his interlocutor. The branches were broken off, and then here's the purpose: in order that I may be grafted in. And then Paul says, I guess. Well enough, or you say well, or you speak right, and some kind of response like this. We're going to list this here as Paul's qualified agreement with the interlocutor's assertion. Okay, and that is up until 20a to b. And then his agreement here is yes, indeed, they were broken off by unbelief, but you stand by faith. So here we have either this instrumental or this dative of cause here. That the cause for the unbelieving Jews to be broken off from the olive was because of apostia, and then the Gentiles, they were grafted in because of pistia. So you can see here the play in Greek, but you can't get it in English. In English, we just have their unbelief and their faith, whereas in Greek we just say it's apostia, unbelief. Pistia is faith, and so this is you get the nice pun here in Greek, whereas obviously in English we have completely different core roots of the word. But here we do agree that that Paul is agreeing with the Gentiles here, that therefore shall you say the branches were broken off in order that I may be grafted in, and he agrees up to that point where it's qualified that they were broken off because of unbelief, but you stand by faith. And then Paul's going to take it a little bit further here, but you can see here that back in verse 13, Paul addressed them corporately, where he said, "Humin de lego tois ethnesin," but I speak to you Gentiles. So that's using the second person plural, you, and notice here, ever since, verse 17, Paul's been addressing them in the second person singular, su, here, okay? And he continues to do so all the way down to verse 24. So he started off with the collective idea of humes, you, plural, but then he's particularizing it here in today's lesson here in verses 17 to 21 that we're reviewing here today. At least for right now, we are 17 to 21, and he's continuing here, and he's particularizing it in the singular, su. And that is to heighten the language, to bring it into sharp focus. Then that would be the reason why he would do that, and just so that they would, he's making them own these statements, because Paul understands that in the, being the capital city of Rome, they had this superiority complex, and Paul wants to deflect that. Because remember, Judea was some backwater country, and the way definitely Paul's presenting this is that hey, listen, you're getting on through the coattails of the Jews here. You're being grafted into their rich root of the olive tree. You're just a wild olive branch being grafted in. So Paul's making no mistake on that this is all about Christianity's Jewish roots, and just remember that Christianity is definitely it's a Jewish religion. It's not its own. Jesus died King of the Jews. He didn't die King of the Christians. Okay, he died King of the Jews. I don't want to disparage the name Christian, but sometimes people they don't even know the Jewish roots of the word Christian, if I could say that. Okay, it's just a messianic religion. Okay, then coming in here to this particular slide, we're just continuing on here, and we're picking this up in 20C. And this is going to go all the way until V21. And so basically what Paul here, Paul is then delivering his Parenesis here in on this particular slide. And it really kind of nicely, the text in Paul's, his Parenesis, or his admonition here, really lines up very, very nicely. So he first offers a prohibition: do not think highly, and then a hard contrast, but fear. So this is a contrasting exhortation of fear. And then we have the basis of this whole exhortation, or this Parenesis, in gar here, for. So this provides the basis. This is the basis of Paul's exhortation of not thinking highly, but fearing. Okay, for if God did not spare the natural branches, neither shall he spare you. So this is very, very poignant here, and you can then begin to see here that Paul, this is, you got to remember, this is his Parenesis here to the Roman Church. These are not empty words. Okay, these are not hollow words. These are very sober words. And if you don't take them seriously, then you're going to end up as some crazy, once saved, always saved proponent, whether it's of the Calvinist variety or of the, just the traditional provisionist. the typical Baptist theology that we see. And this could, these are inimical to the biblical text. If you have any doubt, there is something called the divorce clause found in Matthew 5 and in chapter 19, which gives an allowance for for divorce in the New Testament because of fornication, marital unfaithfulness. Okay, and it's the exception clause that rules the day for divorce and remarriage in the church. And this is no difference for the doctrine of salvation, whether we're talking about the topic of divorce. So, and Paul here is, remember, God is no respecter of person. If he didn't spare the natural branches, well, of course he's not going to spare you. That's why I was telling you that, through this, God, Paul is not a Calvinist. He's not a once saved, always saved person. And this whole golden chain just got broken here. Okay. Now it is this is a warning. It's, this isn't, don't think you can flippantly lose your salvation. You can't lose it. You have to throw it away. And, but you have to, you can't take this as hollow words. If you're that hardcore on this, then I guess there's absolutely no grounds for divorce ever in the New Testament. I mean, if you're going to exegete the text, this way, and not apply the exception clause, for salvation, well, then you're going to be you're going to be not a very happy camper when you come to the rest of the statements, that Paul would make, whether they be in Colossians or if you go to the book of Hebrews, or the book of James or the book of Revelation, they're all over the New Testament, and this here is Paul's not going to contradict himself, from chapter 8 to here. This is Paul's theology. You want to know Paul's theology? It's right here. It's all being panned out here in chapter 11. So if you think these are hollow words, then you can live your life and your doctrine according to that. But no, this is Paul's Parenesis. Do not think highly, but fear. And then the basis for all this. For if God didn't spare the natural branches, neither is he going to spare you. So, just, take your little doctrines that are half-baked, and they don't stand up to this. And that's all I got to say. And but I am going to push it because there's just way too many pansies interpreting the New Testament. Okay, then moving right along here. Now, if you thought Paul was just joking around, well, fasten your seatbelt. Therefore, behold, the kindness and severity of God. On the one hand, severity upon those who fell, but upon you the kindness of God, if you continue on in kindness, since you also shall be cut off. I mean, come on. These are divine. This is a divine passive here, and this is God who's executing the judgment here. So just if you almost bailed off out of this, off this site here, Well, that's because you don't want to put up with sound words. You can't contradict these words. These are not hollow words. And Paul's not contradicting himself. This is the bottom line. This here is the, the conditions for divorce and remarriage. Okay, that was given in Matthew 20, chapter 5 and 19. Okay, the exception clause. Well, there's we also have an exception clause here for continuing on in the faith. That's if you continue to abide in kindness. And you're not the one who loses your salvation. God rips your salvation away from you and casts you into hell. Okay, so just in case you didn't get the, you got to get what's going on here, who the actor is here. Okay, so this is Paul's conclusion. It's starting right here in verses 22 to 24, and what we're looking at here is verse 22. So therefore here, so Paul's summing up his argument. Okay, so he's summing up his ideas. This is not hollow words. Okay, this is a conjunction of inference here. So he's making he's coming to his conclusion here. He's not coming to some idle or hollow words. And then he gives this imperative. Behold thou the kindness and severity of God. All right, severity upon those who fell. This is talking about the unbelieving Jews, but the kindness of God upon you, okay, who believe. Now it's conditioned, okay, if you continue in kindness, since you shall also be cut off. Okay, so it couldn't be any plainer here. It's all laid out here, Paul's correlative application of judgment upon the Gentiles and salvation upon the Gentiles and judgment upon Israel here in 22b, and then the conditions and bases for God's kindness and severity. It's kindness if you continue on, and if you don't, well, sorry, you just got cut off. Now I say this, you guys, because the whole church is full of this sickening doctrine of once saved, always saved. Okay, you don't make doctrine until you read the end of the book. Okay, we're just halfway into the New Testament. Okay, and you want to make a case in chapter 8 for some golden chain. Well, it just got ripped and yanked here. Okay, and God's the one who's doing it. These are divine. This is a divine passive. So guys, just wake up, and get with the program. Okay, so let's see what some of your favorite authors say here. But Paul's main point in this verse at its end to repeat his warning to the Gentile believer who may presume on God's goodness. For the goodness of God is not simply a past act or automatic benefit on which the believer can rest secure. It's also a continuing relationship in which the believer must remain. Otherwise, that is, if the believer does not continue in the goodness of God, the believer will, like the Jew, be cut off, severed forever from the people of God, and eternally condemned. In issuing this warning, Paul echoes a consistent New Testament theme. Ultimate salvation is dependent on continuing faith. Therefore, the person who ceases to believe forfeits any hope of salvation. And then he has a footnote here. And he would have been done well. Douglas Moo would have been done well to end it right there. But he has to come in here and put his little footnote of once saved, always saved in here. Does this mean that a genuine Christian can lose his faith and thus be eternally condemned? Certainly it's possible to infer this from Paul's warning, but it is no necessary inference, for there is clearly an element of phenomenology in the metaphor that Paul uses throughout these verses. While the olive tree represents the true spiritual people of God, those who are said to belong to the tree are not only those who, through their faith, are actually part of the tree, but also those who only appear to belong to that tree. This is evident from the fact that Paul speaks of unbelieving Jews as having been cut off from the tree. In reality, these Jews had never been part of the tree at all. Well, that's your problem. Yes, they are. They are a part of the tree. That's who chapters 9 to 11 is all about. God hasn't given up on the Gentiles. There's still hope for them as long as they're alive. They can believe, okay? But they're going to be cut off, all right? And that's why he talks about the severity and the and the kindness of God. Douglas Moo here is just, he's just appeasing his, he's appeasing his denominational stance. That's all he's doing here. And to most likely to keep his job over there, at Wheaton. And so he basically, he comes down in the same way then that those Gentiles, within the church at Rome and elsewhere who appear to be part of the people, yet do not continue in faith, may have never been part of that tree at all. So he's basically trying to take the verses from 1 John 1:9 about the Antichrist who had entered the church, that they went out from us because they were never of us. Well, yeah, if you're an Antichrist, you never were of us. Paul's not talking about Antichrist here. He's talking about Christian believers. Okay, Doug Moo, you need to go back to the basics here. You're totally messing up your exegesis by eisegesis of Calvinism and injecting it into this text. You knew you had a clue because you put what the text actually stated in the main part of your text, and you had to put your little Calvinism note down here, once saved always saved, down here at the bottom, and we can see right through it. And if you think I was kidding, we're going to take up another one, Schreiner. The necessity of continuing in the faith is hammered home in the closing words of verse 22. If you remain in his kindness, otherwise you also will be cut off. This threat cannot be dismissed as an idle one. Paul never warns his readers of the necessity of continuing faith in order to be saved. One should never conclude from Paul's teaching on divine election that he downplayed the necessity of human beings continuing to exercise faith in order to obtain eschatological salvation. Those who do so impose an alien system upon the Pauline writings. The warnings are grammatically hypothetical, but are seriously intended for believers. Those who do not continue in faith will face God's judgment. Neither would it be correct to conclude that some of those that God elected will fail to continue in the faith. Now, neither would it be correct to conclude that some of those that God elected will fail to continue in the faith. This is his death knell, okay? And this is exactly where Moo put in his little footnote, but Schreiner wanted to leave it in the text. And so he's going to then, appeal to Murray. Observes rightly that God's saving embrace and endurance are correlative. When we look at it retrospectively, we discover that those who fail to persevere thereby reveal that they were never actually part of the elect community. But we must be aware of imposing this retrospective comment upon the warning so that they lose their function for believers. Okay, so these are just hollow words. Whatever he's going to say, he's denying that these are real. This is a real warning. Okay, it's just a hollow warning. It has no basis. He's a once saved, always saved pansy. Okay. But he's trying to overcome his stuff. We must take seriously the words of the text. If we fall away, we shall face final judgment. Those who brush aside the warnings as unnecessary conclude that they are protected from God's wrath no matter how they behave. They are presuming upon God's grace. It's all just double talk, okay? Because neither would it be correct to conclude that some of those that God elected will fail to continue in the faith. So he's taking the same exact stance as Doug Moo, that they went out from us because they were never really of us. Now, you got to go back to 1 John, and is talking about Antichrist there. So I don't think Antichrists are believing Christians. They never were. Okay, that's a different, words are always, meaning is always context driven. And Schreiner here and Moo, you guys have failed the test. You're just simply, confirming the denominational stance. That's all that's going on here. And we're not buying it. Okay, then we have the, coming here, we have the condition and basis for God's reversal of severity and kindness to Israel. But those also, if they do not continue in unbelief, they shall be grafted in. For God, so we have a basis clause, for God is able to graft them in again. So here we have this statement, of this condition and basis. We have the protesis. If Israel believes, the hypothesis, they'll be regrafted. And then the basis for this is God's ability. So God's the one who, is ultimately in charge of grafting in and breaking off, and he's the one who controls, thumbs up or thumbs down. And it's based upon, our exercise of faith. Okay, just right here. If they don't continue in unbelief, then God's able to regraft them in again. And that's the statement here of this text, and it just makes plain sense. And that's just the way, I'm calling it. Okay, then coming here then to the final basis clause of Paul's, allegory here of his conclusionary thoughts. So we have Paul's final capstone basis statement, a calva omer a minore ad meius argument. Okay, so Paul returns to his where he started off up there in 11 to 15 with these calva omer arguments from lesser to greater, or a minore ad meius here, from the minor premise to the major premise. And so this is a favorite Jewish method of writing to make their arguments, and Paul is just performing according to the standards of Second Temple Judaism rhetoric. Okay, and Paul's a player here, for he says, and we'll look down here at the bottom of the text and read it, and then we'll look at it diagrammatically. For if you by nature were cut off a wild olive, and contrary to nature were grafted into the good olive tree, how much more these who are by nature who by nature shall be grafted into their own olive tree. So this is a calva omer argument from lesser to greater, and he's looking at the Gentiles here, and saying, hey, look, if you were, by nature a wild olive tree that was cut off and contrary to nature were grafted into the good olive, well, how much more these who are by nature, of the good olive tree shall be grafted into their own olive tree. So that's the rhetoric here. And remember, look at how this note ends. It ends with the Jewish nation being regrafted in. Okay. And the argument there is supporting, remember, 11:11, 2:24 is a unit, and 11 to 16 was, Paul was saying that, did they fall so as, never to rise again? Well, meganoita, may it never be. So God never, casted and thrown down Israel so that she'll never rise again. Remember, that there was, he said, how much, more their fullness, or, how much more their acceptance. Well, then, how much more shall they be grafted into their own olive tree? Who were by nature of the true olive tree. So this is showing here that God has not given up on Israel, and that going back to verse 16, that the holiness that was attributed to the first fruits, and to the sanctifying quality of the root will extend all the way to the branches and to the full, the full, gathering of grain in to be baked in the oven, that the whole lump is going to be sanctified. So and so that the inference of that is that, here, that Israel, God hasn't given up on Israel. He's still, his arms are still wide open, waiting for them to come to him. And that's God's enduring commitment to Israel. And this is going to lead on then into our next unit, about the salvation of all Israel. Okay, so we'll end here with Wagner. Paul's earlier contention that Israel has stumbled in order to bring salvation to the Gentiles finds figurative expression in his statement that natural branches were cut off so that wild branches could be grafted in. Yet God's unconventional husbandry does not reflect the superiority of the uncultivated branches. Instead, it displays both the credible wideness of God's mercy, which embraces even those who had no reason to expect his blessing, and the sobering severity of his judgment, which does not overlook the unbelief of God's own people. The proper response to such a combination of grace and impartiality is not boasting, but holy fear and a fixed determination to hold fast to God's goodness. The Gentiles stand by faith, which in the context of Romans refers first and foremost to God's own faithfulness embodied and enacted in and through Jesus Christ. If they fail to remain in God's goodness, however, they too will find themselves severed from the root. And notice that there's no footnote there for Wagner. What he says is what he means. Although Paul clearly intends, by means of this extended metaphor, to call his Gentile listeners to humility and perseverance in faith, the central theme of his trope is God's continuing commitment to Israel. Right on the money. In the face of Israel's unfaithfulness, it is Israel's refusal to embrace the gospel of Christ, in which God's righteousness is now fully revealed. That has led to their being cut off. But Paul does not believe that Israel's unbelief is the end of the story. The branches God has pruned away will not have been thrown on the trash heap and burned. Instead, Paul argues these natural branches may yet be regrafted onto the tree from which they have been cut, if they do not remain in their unbelief. Amen. Amen. Right, this has been another session of Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe.